What do you think?
I think we're dead meat. Real dead meat.
You're dead meat! Go ahead and laugh, you guys. If I ever find a little bastards that did this, they're dead meat.
Welcome to the Dead Meat Podcast, an extension of the YouTube channel Dead Meat. I'm James.
I'm Chelsea, and we're engaged, and we like to get scared together. Hey, last week's episode was sad and depressing, and I came up with the idea mid-episode to do this week's, where we basically, we're just gonna argue about whether a bunch of kind of gray area movies are even horror movies or not.
Yeah.
Where some people think they are and some people aren't. And I put up a poll on Twitter.
Bunch of polls.
Yeah, asking people for their opinions on different movies. And this episode's just gonna be us arguing the whole, like, I'm gonna say straight away, there's not like I'm not here to give you any answers. Like, this is not gonna be an episode where we parse out a definitive.
I think we can discuss it though and see if we land.
Sure,
on
okay.
anything.
If we
Yeah.
both can agree on something, but then inevitably everyone in the comments will yell at us for
Yeah,
the
but
choice
fuck 'em.
we make. That's what I'm saying is this is just gonna be chaos this episode.
Also, for anyone watching, we have new camera angles. Don't be confused.
Yeah, I'm trying different stuff every week in this new studio and seeing what I like and what I don't. So
2, we did not coordinate the fact that we're both wearing Simpson shirts.
yeah, that was an accident.
Yeah.
We just both are wearing Simpsons t-shirts.
Okay, so what is a horror movie? What counts as a horror movie? I'm going to say right off the bat that I am interested in exploring the idea of some conditions that are either necessary or sufficient. Now, these are logic terms. Anyone who's taken philosophy classes or maybe certain mathematics that get a little more heady, they may be familiar with these terms, but these are conditional descriptions. Necessary is there anything that a movie absolutely needs to be considered a horror movie, and without that thing cannot possibly be a horror movie? Sufficient is different. Is there anything that a movie can possess that automatically makes it a horror movie? Now, those are different things, okay? When I was quickly looking at the Wikipedia article just to refresh myself on the best way to explain these, there was, for direct sunlight, it is necessary for the sun to be above the horizon, right? However, that is not necessarily a sufficient condition because of an eclipse that could prevent direct sunlight. So just because the sun is above the horizon does not necessarily mean you are experiencing direct sunlight. But without the sun above the horizon, you cannot experience direct sunlight. So I am curious. My hunch right now is that there is no necessary condition for a horror movie. There's nothing that every single movie that we consider horror will have in
I
it.
kind of agree. I don't think we're going to find a single thing,
Yeah.
which is weird to realize.
Yeah, because a musical, for instance,
It's got songs in it.
it is a necessary condition for a musical to have songs.
Yeah, or comedies. Well, I guess comedy gets a little weird
I think
too.
other genres do get a little, yeah.
But
they're
musical
tough.
even... That,
Can you have a musical without a
no,
song?
but I'm saying a musical isn't necessarily... Like, that's an art form.
Oh, that's true. It's like animation's
It's
not
like
a genre.
a movie has to be, for like, you know, something that is like a bunch of frames stitched together and it moves.
Yeah.
Or otherwise.
No, I agree.
Or, I don't know, even then you can argue, well, no, technically there's movies that are... Whatever. You get what I mean. Like,
For
a
sure.
musical is like...
It's not a
like
genre that's because you can have a horror musical or a comedy
Yeah, this
musical.
is getting into the film theory classes that I thought were kind of a big nap at a certain point, where it's like the argument of what even is filmed.
But I am curious about the sufficient condition because, for instance, I was thinking if I could think of any sufficient conditions for other genres, and perhaps traveling in space travel is a sufficient condition for sci-fi. I don't know if there is any movie that has space travel that wouldn't be at least somewhat science fiction. And that's the other thing, is movies can be multiple genres.
I disagree. I don't think Star Wars is science fiction.
You don't think it's a sci-fi adventure? I know it's adventure first and foremost.
Because my definition of sci-fi, and by the way, I'm not here all for a logical and thoughtful. I'm just here. I didn't take philosophy classes. I almost flunked out of math. I took art classes. I'm here for absolute chaos. But I don't know. Sci-fi to me is like a hard sci-fi, which I guess is its own thing. Is it sci-fi or a hard sci-fi?
Yeah.
But sci-fi to me always, like Minority Report is a sci-fi. Like that's exploring some ethics, and there's some, or just exploring the consequences of a technology, or some kind of like Interstellar is sci-fi because we're dealing with the questions of time, like time dilation and shit.
I agree that
Star
those
Wars
are sci-fi.
is a fantasy.
I think it's a sci-fi fantasy adventure.
I guess.
And that's the other thing going into this, is that things can be multiple genres.
Yeah.
You don't just have to classify a movie as just horror or just something else. Because there are so many horror comedies out there that I would consider still horror. Shaun of the Dead is a funny movie. Zombieland is a funny movie.
Right.
But I would still put them as horror movies.
Right.
They are just also more than that.
A few people brought up horror comedies. Like, when does something stop being a horror movie and just start being a comedy that has kind of a horror theme to it? And that's where I think I might differ with you on something like Shaun of the Dead. I don't know if I would call Shaun of the Dead a horror movie.
I would call it a horror comedy.
But I
or perhaps
also
a
haven't
comedy horror.
seen it in years. I mean, it's been over 10 years since I've last seen it.
Me
So
too,
I don't
actually.
know if I can definitively say.
With that, especially with horror comedy, and we've discussed this on the podcast before, there's always the question of like, is Scream a horror comedy or is it a horror movie with comedic elements?
But see, that the opening is scary. There's scary stuff in it. And again, maybe there's scenes like that in Shaun of the Dead where no, they're just straight up scary. And
But I agree that Shaun of the Dead is primarily more focused on comedy than Scream, which is primarily focused on horror. And I think what meets in the middle there is Cabin in the Woods, maybe. Might be equal parts comedy and horror.
Yeah.
Cabin in the Woods may be the ultimate horror comedy, perhaps.
maybe.
Looking at it from that perspective. And also, of course, you know, this is not a random selection. This is not a scientific poll. This is a Twitter audience who follows us.
This is just an episode where I wanted to make everyone fight each other on Twitter and everyone fight each other in the comment section, I guess. I just realized, like, this is going to be an absolute shit show. I'm so sorry to our mod team. Okay, here we go. Our first one that I picked, and I picked ones that are pretty, at least I think are borderline. Annihilation.
Yes.
The Alex Garland movie.
2018, right?
That sounds right.
Yeah. I think it is a horror as, like, it's maybe tertiary genre. It's definitely sci-fi and then maybe something else before horror. But I think that it's horror related, adjacent.
I kind of think it's a horror movie too. I think it's a sci-fi first. It's a hard
Absolutely.
sci-fi first. And that's another good example of what I would consider to be a sci-fi. But yeah, okay, so in terms of this being a horror though, this movie's fucking terrifying. I think Annihilation is so scary. The first time we saw it, I was gripping the seat. I was so unsettled by the entire third act of this movie where she goes into the lighthouse and there's the soundtrack gets so fucking creepy. It saves this, like, because the soundtrack up till then is like, you know, it's good, but it's not anything that is like, it's all kind of in the background. I don't think it's like a standout except for that Crosby, Stills and Nash song in the beginning. But the soundtrack is like front and center all of a sudden, and it's just all these creepy, unhuman noises. And you have Jennifer Jason Leigh, and her face is all weird, and then she blows up pretty much. And oh man, when she finds the camera that Oscar Isaac left.
The camera was one of the scariest things I've seen.
Yeah.
Even before
And
the end, which is existential dread. You got Murder Bear. That's scary.
Yeah, I was going to say the bear, lots of people, when they were discussing Annihilation, the bear scene is easily the most cited one in terms of defending it being a horror movie. And yeah, That is the scariest shit
Oh, that's
ever.
funny because that was not the scariest part of that movie to me. For me, it was the existential dread that I felt at the end, which is interesting if that is a sufficient condition for horror movies, because then it's like, are all David Lynch movies horror movies? Maybe.
If we have time, I do want to talk about where David Lynch kind of falls, because I think David Lynch movies are fucking terrifying. They're some of the scariest movies I've ever seen. Inland Empire like fucked my shit up. But yeah, I think the end with the twin of herself and the weird interpretive dance and it just, I don't know. I just remember feeling so weird after that movie, and it really stuck with me.
Yeah. So I would say it is not primarily a horror movie,
No,
but I believe it is a horror movie, or at least horror
and there's
adjacent.
the scene where they find that other tape and it's like the guy's intestines.
the
Yeah, it's a
pool.
scary fucking movie.
That's some good shit. So what our poll?
Our Twitter poll
Audience say.
says 74.7% of people, and we had 4,816 votes. They say it's horror, 74.7%. Not horror, 25.3%. And yeah, I just have here lots of people mentioning the bear scene.
So about 3/4 call it a horror movie. And we should note, perhaps, for anyone who didn't see the tweet, you did specify in the initial tweet that it can be considered horror among other genres, because I think everyone would say, yes, Annihilation is a sci-fi movie first and foremost.
Yeah, so the conditions of this poll, I guess that's a good thing to clarify. I only gave yes or no as an option, which is which you panicked a little bit about, but that's the whole point.
Yeah.
Because if I give a third option, everyone's just going to pick that.
Yeah, exactly. That's true.
And yeah, I just wanted to see, like, if you had to choose whether or not these. So you just have yes or no. And yeah, you don't have to primarily think this is, like, I don't think Annihilation is first and foremost a horror movie, but
Agreed.
I think it could count. So, okay, there we go.
Cool.
Dylan at Zyklon Clinic says it's a cosmic horror and one of the rare good ones. It has such a dark, depressing tone, the inevitability of everything on Earth essentially dying and becoming something new. It's unavoidable, though beautiful. Yeah, I think I think existential horror and cosmic horror is what really now gets under my skin the most.
Me too. I think
it really
affects
is
me the most.
it is the stuff where when a movie's dealing with it and it does it really well, that's where I get the most freaked out. I wonder if maybe that's because now we've both spent so much time with horror movies that, like, we know, like, we're beyond being scared of an image we see on screen of something scary or a movie monster. Like, my brain is just so rewired to, like, oh, how did they do that? Or, like, who's playing, you know, I come at it from such a film critic point of view that it's, but stuff where it's cosmic horror, and we're starting to veer into, it's just stuff that's gonna be scary no matter what. That's gonna.
The other thing I wanted to say, I'm glad we stuck with Annihilation for just a minute longer. That Annihilation reminds me of the feelings I felt watching Apocalypse Now and Aguirre, The Wrath of God, where it's just this inevitable journey into, like, deeper and deeper hostile territory, not even necessarily from humans, but just from the environment, and knowing you're not going to get out of there, and it's just getting worse and worse.
Yeah, and an ending
like
that makes you feel like I'm.
The end of Aguirre affected me more than most other movies. Granted, it was probably because I was in high school,
and
but
also
like,
because, I mean, he slam dunks that monkey onto that boat. It sucks.
oh, I thought he threw him in the water. He throws him onto the boat.
I have no idea.
Aw.
I don't think we see where that monkey goes, but
Aw.
I just have a feeling Klaus Kinski didn't really care.
He probably did not care.
That guy was a piece of shit. Let's move on to our next movie, Crimson Peak.
Interesting.
Crimson Peak.
So, we just watched this pretty recently. And I would say, yeah, it's a horror movie.
That's tough. I would say I'm going to lean towards yes, because I have to remember and always remind myself that horror's origins are extremely gothic.
I was going to say, it is gothic.
And it is a classically made horror story and ghost story. I think it would be kind of ignoring. It'd be like disrespecting our elders to be like this. Nothing like this is really a horror. It's a period film or it's a drama. But no, this is a It literally is our character being haunted by these ghosts of other characters' past choices and stuff, and that's super gothic horror.
Yeah, I think that if you consider a lot of the Universal monster movies horror, which you should, then you have to include, because this is, yeah, exactly, it's derived from those. And I love how the movie itself explains itself, because it says multiple times about the story within the story that it's not a ghost story, it is a story with ghosts.
Right.
Which is what it is. But yeah, I still think that gothic sensibility and aesthetic is enough to consider it a horror movie. Again, maybe not primarily. Fantasy comes to mind when, really, with any Guillermo del Toro movies.
Yeah. Although it's interesting that I just was also thinking about Shape of Water, which a few people were just talking about. I don't even know if it was a debate over whether or not it's horror, but I think it's an interesting kind of counterpart to this, because this movie where you have Tom Hiddleston as the love interest for most of it. You also have God, I can't remember, guy from Hunnam, the guy who's in Pacific Rim and shit. Anyway, he's also a love interest. But basically, like, there's kind of a love story in this one, but the love interest turns out to be monstrous, even though he's Tom Hiddleston and is very handsome. But then, and this is the one where, out of this or Shape of Water, this one's going to be the horror movie. And I do think this is a horror movie. But then you have Shape of Water, where it's also a love story and your love interest is a horror movie monster. He looks so similar to Creature from the Black Lagoon. It's like in that tradition, but it's not horror. I don't think it's a horror movie at all. It's
when
a
it won the
fantasy
Oscar,
romance.
people were like, "Oh, a horror movie won an Oscar."
I still count it as a win for horror movies, because it felt...
It's a genre movie at the very least, whatever that means.
It's not that it was a straight up horror, but it was more like a tribute to horror, and the way that, like, identifying with the monster in a movie can make you feel. I think Guillermo del Toro has said that's a lot of what that movie is the idea of watching scary movies growing up and identifying with the monster. Yeah, especially in those older ones like Frankenstein. You identify with the monster and he's sympathetic, and I think that's where the idea of Shape of Water, at least partially, comes from. Is it's like, let's make the monster who, the fantasy love interest in this one, because honestly, also, people just want to fuck the monster sometimes.
Sometimes.
There were a lot of think pieces about that after that movie came out.
On the subject of Del Toro, Pan's Labyrinth, I think, is another one that is sometimes considered, because, like,
it is a scary movie.
It is a fantasy movie for sure. It is a war movie.
Yeah.
Is it a horror movie? I don't know. Patrons once voted for me to review it, and I watched it, and I was like, I don't know.
I think I'm torn. I haven't seen it recently enough to feel.
I think Crimson Peak is more horror than either of those.
Sure. Yeah, I agree.
So I would consider
But the Pale Man is scarier than anything in any of those.
Yeah, for sure. What a good monster.
I don't know.
So what did our Twitter audience say about Crimson Peak?
Crimson Peak, we had 4,193 votes, 79.5% horror.
Wow.
20.5% not horror.
So about 4/5 in favor of horror.
Yeah, at, I think, ANJIS Devil says, yes, horror, gothic feel like Woman in Black, which I haven't seen. I would like to.
Scary.
And they said, which wasn't that scary, but allowed me to grab my date's hand. And isn't that, honestly, that's kind of, that might be a very good qualifier for what is a horror movie is. Well, can you take your girl that you want to go steady with to see it, and will it give you an excuse to hold each other's hand? That honestly might be the most cut and dry qualifier.
Maybe, but we were grabbing each other watching Itchy the Killer last night, and we both agreed that that's not horror.
I know, but it should be.
That plot is one I do not want to do on a kill count.
That's the thing, is I don't actually feel like... I mean, I would maybe like to, because I really liked that movie.
Yeah, you did.
That would be a lot to do.
Mm-hmm.
Next up is The Guest.
Ooh, okay.
By the way, the Kong vs. Godzilla trailer came out today. Same director.
Adam Wingard? Yeah. Wingard?
Oh,
I'm not sure how that's said.
Yeah. That trailer looks so fun. He just punches Godzilla right in the face.
On a boat.
Anyway, The Guest. What are we thinking?
This one I have always cited as a movie that is right there on the border.
It's Yeah.
Like if you have concentric circles of horror movies where the center is, you know, Friday the 13th and The Conjuring, and it as you go out in these various circles of horror, you get less and less for sure. The Guest is like right on the border of the outermost circle. I don't know. Because
I think it's a horror movie. I don't know why I feel so strongly about this one, but
it's definitely action-y.
Yes.
You know? And here's a question. I don't think you would consider Drive a horror movie, right?
No.
But I feel like the two of them have pretty similar sensibilities. I mean, it's been a minute since I've seen Drive.
I was going to say, I don't even know if I fucking remember what Drive is about, because
I just remember it being a waste of Christina Hendricks. That's
yeah,
really
no
remember.
kidding.
Yeah.
And also that movie and that soundtrack are pretty much why the entire 2010s was obsessed with like vaporwave and shit.
Yeah, I
like
agree.
it's kind of crazy how influential that movie was. It feels like there was a before and after in terms of what music sounded like and what design looked like. It's wild.
Yeah, like neon colors and shit.
Yeah,
for sure.
But I don't know. I don't really remember Drive all that well, like I said. But is there a sense of like, is there as solid of a bad guy in that? And I don't think that's a must for a horror, but there's not the same, like, Drive to me feels way more character study versus, but again, that's, you know, Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is a character study almost first and foremost, but that's a horror movie for sure. But I don't know. I don't know. I just doesn't.
So what makes you feel that The Guest is a horror movie? Because I'm like, my answer is hands up in the air.
Because I think the intent of it, it's almost like, oh man, it's almost like you can tell sometimes when a director is making something, and it's almost like you can tell that they wouldn't mind if you called it a horror movie. Like, I don't think the director of Drive would be like, I think he'd be confused if you called his movie a horror movie, whereas The Guest, he'd be like, oh yeah, it's a horror movie.
Because what else has Adam Wingard
You're
done?
next.
Yeah, exactly.
Right.
And
yeah.
I think then that this is also tied to Upgrade, which we're going to discuss.
Yes.
Because that's similarly, I don't think Lee Winnell would mind if you called that a horror movie. So I think we're stumbling onto a thing where perhaps knowing who made the movie
I think that's
influence.
another big thing that influences whether people think something is a horror or not. Because for me, it's like within the context of a director's other stuff, I can almost feel, I get more of a sense of what their intent is when they're making something, and just their voice and where they tend to go as a director and just kind of commonalities between stuff. But I don't know. It just, Also, I think The Guest is just so fun, and a horror movie doesn't always have to be fun, but I don't know. I think we're gonna find during this episode that a lot of our decisions are just gonna be, I don't know, it just feels like one.
Just like gut feeling.
I think
sure.
that honestly might just be I might just be trying to talk my way out of not just having to say, I don't know, it just seems like a horror movie to me. That's it. I don't know if I have anything more concrete, but also I think it takes place on Halloween. That probably helps too.
Yeah, sure.
So it's like fall, and there's decorations and Halloween parties, and the end takes place in a haunted house, and the soundtrack is kind of creepy and fun. And
you know what's interesting is not once yet have we talked about kills influencing our decisions.
Yeah.
And the amount of people who die or how grotesque any kills are.
That has much to do with if a movie's a horror, honestly. Because
I agree.
It's weird for a genre where if you like what episode was it we just did where it was the Mastermind one where I found a poll where on this like movie, I think it was on the Mr. Skin database, where it was like the most violent movies or the ones that have the most kills. Surprisingly, horror is not up there, like, count-wise. It's, like, other genres, like action and
like, crime.
Or thriller, and which, you know, those can be horror also. But, yeah, so I don't think that that's really far up my list in terms of
Yeah, because I think all you need to do is like The Conjuring. No one dies.
No one dies in
it is
yeah.
100% a horror movie.
Right.
And that's why I do get annoyed when I get requests for movies and the justification is a lot of people die in it. It's like,
Right.
yeah, but John Wick's not a horror movie.
Right, and even if they're really violent, like, again, and I almost don't want to make this argument because I do want to cover it eventually, but Ichi the Killer is like this is one of the most graphic movies I've ever seen, but I'm not primarily thinking of it as a horror movie. Yeah. It's its own fucking genre. Yeah.
So, what did the poll results say for the guest?
Okay, so this is the poll results. We had 3,475 votes. 73.2% say horror and 26.8% say not horror.
I expected that one to be closer because that's basically what Annihilation was. Pretty close to three-quarters saying yes, horror.
I was expecting that one to be closer too.
I mean, smaller sample size. I'm assuming fewer people have seen it.
Yeah,
but
way less people voted for it.
You know, that one, I would cover on the kill count. It's a fun one. It's a fun one.
I love that movie so fucking much. I fucking love Dan Stevens, dude. He's so good. And I saw that like I'd only before seeing The Guest had only ever seen him in Downton Abbey, which I just need to find clips of Downton Abbey for you to watch so you can understand how jarring it was to see him in this.
Yeah.
Like, whoa, cousin Matthew. At Wicked Wookie says this one was the hardest to choose from.
Nice.
And he ultimately said not horror because on the DVD shelf under action, not with horror. It's next to The Hunt. It's like
Ooh, The Hunt. I meant to suggest you have that. We didn't have that as one of the poll options, right?
No, we can discuss it.
Yeah, because what would you say?
I mean, we covered it on the podcast.
Yeah, but because I hear you talking about Itchy and not one like the podcast.
We can
talk about whatever the fuck
we can cover
want,
whatever
man.
we want.
Yeah, we did Passion of the Christ.
I don't know, The Hunt though. My gut instinct says yes because it also was so heavily talked about in horror circles. It was the cover of Fangoria. It was like a censored Fangoria cover that they had trouble with.
Oh, is it the woman in half?
Yeah, the woman who's like ripped in half. Yeah. So
who direct messaged me on
Really?
Instagram to thank me for covering the movie.
Oh my
And I was like, you did great.
That's so cool.
Dead Sexy was
I
her
love
character
that.
name.
I got a message actually from, and I'm forgetting the character name, but the girl in Anaconda versus
Lake
Lake
Placid?
the girl, she was in Anaconda versus Lake Placid, and she was the one who's like making the crazy faces at the end and is honestly the only one reacting appropriately to everything.
Oh
that's
yeah,
going
that's
on.
right. Yeah,
so
like
we're
the
like
college
Instagram
girl, yeah.
friends now.
That's great.
That's like that honestly will never not make my day when I get a message from an actor like that. I never see it coming. Like
Friggin' Midsummer.
Ruben.
Yeah.
Ruben. I love
to comment on a video and is a kid.
I didn't know Ruben was played by
I had no idea. That's a long time in the makeup chair for a kid.
Yeah, it is.
I'm assuming.
Anyway, it never stops being great,
the best,
and it always makes my entire day.
Yeah, it's interesting because The Hunt, I also want to say yes.
Yeah.
And my justification I was going to give was like, because it's kind of like Battle Royale, which I would also could say yes, the Japanese movie. But then someone's going to hit me with, well, what about Hunger Games? And I would say no. I would... What about you?
Hunger Games is no.
Okay, yeah. But people have requested it.
That's not horror.
That's what we say. But why is that not? But do you think
it's in like the weird Ichi the Killer area where I find both of those like viscerally disturbing.
Yeah.
Like Battle Royale is terrifying. I think the scene in the classroom, like the first when they get there and they realize, and he's like showing them the video and it's fucking Takeshi. Oh man, why can't I remember his like full name? But it's an actor who's like primarily he's a comedic actor, and that
that's right.
casting is like against type, and where he just like fucking shoots a kid. Right?
Yeah, he kills one kid right off the bat.
That whole opening, it just is so scary. I don't know.
It's tough. These movies are tough, man.
I'll lean towards yes for that one.
Yeah, and so with The Hunt, it's like a comedy maybe first and foremost.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of action-y, but I would still put it with, I mean, obviously I covered it.
Yeah. Hey, I want to talk to you about our sponsor this week, Blue Blocks. If you're watching the video version of this, you can see that we have on some very stylish glasses. And James's are especially very orange.
They're very orange.
But they're orange for a reason, and actually mine have a very slight tint to them too. When I take them on and off, I actually notice a very, everything's just a tiny bit more yellow. Like, you barely notice it, but it's filtering out some of these kind of blue frequencies. When you take those off, what does it look like?
Oh man, it is wild because it's just a orange shade over my eyes when I'm wearing them.
Blue Blocks glasses they're specifically designed to filter out different frequencies of color. So the ones I'm wearing where they look basically like normal glasses, they're all blue light filtering, but these I wear when I'm editing video, because as much as I want to be able to wear the orange ones, getting closer to nighttime, since I'm a video editor, I have to be able to see what stuff looks like and what color it is. And so these are great for being able to filter out some of that blue light that really messes with your melatonin. Because I have big sleep issues. I have a really hard time falling asleep at night.
Yeah, and staring at screens all day does not make it easier.
Yeah, and so nights where I wind down by either wearing these kind of like clear blue light glasses while I work, or I put on the orange ones if I'm getting ready for bed and I'm maybe even just kind of chilling.
Like reading.
Yeah, you can still read
with
them.
orange paper.
Blue Blocks is also giving back by doing a buy one, get one gift campaign. So every pair you buy, they donate a pair of reading glasses to someone who needs them.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. If you want to try out Blue Blocks, you can go to blueblocks.com/deadmeat and use the promo code deadmeat at checkout to get 20% off and free shipping worldwide. And then once again, that is Blue Blocks, BLUBLOX. So not the color, it's BLUBLOX.com/deadmeat. And we also have the link in the description. Use the code deadmeat to get free shipping worldwide and 20% off of your order.
Just spell both words the cool way.
All right. This next one, we all need to take a deep breath before we talk about it. Just because
oh no, I know what it is.
Do you feel that rumble in the distance?
Yeah, if I had a glass of water,
your glass of water would be shaking. Jurassic Park.
Jurassic Park, baby.
Park. Do you want to know the results of the poll?
Before we discuss it?
That's up to you.
I'm going to get mad.
Yeah, I know you're going to get mad. This is what I'm talking about, is this episode. People may be listening up to this point are thinking, oh, and she really hyped this up. It's not gonna be them yelling at each other. It's them pretty reasonably
honey,
discussing
you say
stuff.
each other, and I'm worried that you're going to be on the wrong side of this argument and that we're going to have...
That's the thing, though, is I know I am going to be on... I disagree with you, and that you're going to get mad.
What do the poll results say?
Jurassic Park, 7,000, a ton of votes.
Wow, that's the most so far.
7,484 votes. People felt strongly about this, and I have a lot of tweets from people explaining their point of view of this one too. Horror, 45.7%, not horror, 54.3%.
I'm okay with that.
Sure.
Because it's close.
If it was just a total...
If it was a blowout, I would be pissed.
Okay. At Demi James says anyone who voted no on Jurassic Park and yes on Jaws doesn't make a fucking lick of internal sense. Both are creature features and Jurassic Park has far more scenes of dark terror. This is an outrage.
I rescind that tweet.
You do?
I rescind that tweet because I said as much in the kitchen to James Gressel, who lives with us, and he made a good point that I could only react to with stunned silence. He said that he could see differing on those two movies if you just look at intended tone throughout the movie.
Yeah.
Because,
that's where I land too.
Because Jaws, its primary intention throughout the movie, despite scenes that have levity, is to scare you and to have suspense. Jurassic Park, as Gressel said, its primary intention throughout the movie, despite having scenes that are intended to scare you, is to inspire awe and wonder.
Right. A lot of people arguing that too. Wonder was a big sticking point for people.
It's like the Brachiosaurus scene.
Right.
It's like that scene, people see it and they're like, it's not a horror movie.
But also, I this isn't a one-to-one comparison, but something like I think Midsummer is pretty solidly a horror movie, but there are scenes in that I feel awed by. I'm thinking of a similar one where there's kind of a soundtrack swell where she sees their living quarters for the first time and there's these beautiful paintings everywhere. And I honestly, like, that score just really gets me. And there's something about that moment that isn't scary. It is meant, I think, to inspire kind of sense of relief almost for her. And it's like just a really beautiful. And there's a lot of times that movie feels kind of beautiful.
And yet you have divergent opinions on those two movies being horror.
Yeah, I think...
Here's why I would call it, at the very least, horror adjacent.
Yeah.
I would, again...
Horror adjacent, yeah. If there were the third option, I would pick it, yeah.
Okay. I would not call it horror in its... Like, I would call it horror as its, like, fifth genre, probably. Because I think it would be adventure first and foremost.
Yeah.
Sci-fi
for sure,
before
yeah.
horror, messing with nature.
Again, this is the argument I have where sci-fi isn't always just space stuff.
Yeah.
Like this
I was saying if something has space travel, does it automatically
then therefore
it doesn't
is it,
necessarily need it. Yeah.
Right.
Fantasy perhaps, action perhaps, and then horror. Maybe. Not standing true to that. But the reason, it has so many scenes that are terrifying. T-Rex breaking out of the pen. T-Rex chasing the Jeep through the dark rain. The Velociraptors in the kitchen. The Dilophosaurus eating Dennis Nedry in the flip. All those are shot in a scary way.
Right.
It's dark. It's rainy. It is intended to scare you, and it scared the shit out of me when I was a kid. And I think Lost World even leans more into that kind of dark aesthetic. I don't think Jurassic Park 3 or Jurassic World are horror in the least bit. Although I think Fallen Kingdom gets back into that aesthetic.
Here's what like you were talking about. Yeah, okay, like it's dark and rainy and it's moody. But when I think of Jurassic Park, just my gut, like, okay, word associated, just like word cloud, Jurassic Park. Dark and rainy is not in that thought bubble for
Interesting.
me. I'm thinking it's like greenery and we're driving around in the Jeep and it's Isla Nublar.
I think they call it.
I don't know, dude.
I think they pronounce it Isla Nublar.
Yeah.
That's interesting because when I think of Jurassic Park, the first scene I think of is T-Rex escaping the pen.
But you know why I think that might be my first association, and another point I want to bring up about that could also maybe help us make some decisions on other films. Another big difference between Jaws and Jurassic Park, the theme. The Jurassic Park theme is...
Ooh, the music?
It's...
Okay.
There is nothing scary about that theme. It's beautiful. It's the Brachiosaurus scene,
which I would also say is another point towards Lost World being the more horror, because the Lost World theme is much darker and scarier.
And the Jaws theme is one of the most classic horror scores of all time. So
okay,
I don't know if that's make or break, but that's another factor, very big factor for me.
Let me counter with another factor. I think Jurassic Park does focus on, and again, earlier we said it wasn't that important of a factor for us, but it does care about its kills. It is doing a variety of kills at regular intervals in interesting ways. You got a guy getting eaten off a toilet, which everyone remembers. You find Sam Jackson's arm just like
someone
Ellie
cited that scene as evidence toward it being a horror because that's a horrifying moment.
It is, Arnold, and then it's his dislocated arm. Like, that's horrific.
Yeah,
and I love it.
What was the marketing like for Jurassic Park? I'm too young to remember.
That's a good question. I'm too young because it came out in 93.
Did they market it? Because I feel like I remember Jurassic Park being popular with kids and being marketed to kids because of dinosaurs and stuff, and I don't know. I
mean, it's popular with kids.
That's true. Yeah.
I will say that maybe the Lost World being more horror also influenced it, because by the time I got into Jurassic Park, Lost World was coming out, and And that movie, I think, was advertised a little bit more horror. I mean, it opens with a kid getting not killed, but you think she might be getting that trailer hanging off the cliff. Like, that's some good horror stuff. But I'm not going to, as much as my tweets belie this, I'm not going to attack any. Just admit that it's horror adjacent, okay? You don't have to say that it's horror, but admit that it has horror elements, and we're good.
Friend of the show, Iva Trees Little, says Spielberg wouldn't have his own kids watch Jurassic Park. Is that true?
I don't know, but if she's saying it, I'll trust her.
I can still hear the screams of terror in the theater. Horror, yes.
Yeah.
This is an interesting argument from LASUPBIEN. Lisa Bien. They say they associate, so this is in regards to Jurassic Park and Jaws. This is a person who said no for both, which I think is an interesting. I associate both of them with being blockbusters, which for some reason I can't really explain, doesn't put them in horror for me. I suppose you could say they're like action horror thriller, which is horror adjacent. There is something to the idea that a blockbuster, starts being less of a horror movie.
I don't know. I would call it.
Yeah, it's a horror movie, but also
Chapter 1 and Chapter 2 blockbusters.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't have like a fully fledged argument here, but there is something to the idea that like horror is such a weird little like genre that is it even possible for a big blockbuster movie to fit in with the weird like kind of like niche that gets shoved in the corner. I don't know, but I think at this point, it made so much money. That's a horror movie.
I do have to bring up the fact that Jurassic Park features dinosaurs, and they're pretty close to Godzilla, monsters, creature features, and like I think that we can agree that Godzilla is horror.
I would put Godzilla as horror, but again, I don't know why this year we're covering a lot of stuff that is borderline.
Yeah.
Which I think maybe just comes from like, okay, we've covered straight horror for so many years in a row. It's nice to kind of, go a bit into those gray areas, but I feel like you see Godzilla stuff at horror conventions.
That's what, and
that's another thing is I'm like, is there stuff from this at horror conventions? Then it's a horror movie.
Jurassic Park, yeah, I see stuff.
Yeah,
and then there's King Kong too. There's King Kong horror. I feel like that's further removed, but yes.
Yeah.
So I don't know, man. It's whatever. We're having fun with it.
Yeah. I like I said, no one is coming away from this with any definitive.
Yeah.
Guide to what is and isn't horror. I don't think it's possible. I think that's extremely honestly, I think the thing it's gonna be for me is just do you feel like it was a horror movie, like in your gut? Because it's just this weird nebulous, like, did it not necessarily even scare you, but in your heart did it register as something scary or intended to be, or just I don't know. It's just a feeling. It's just a.
And that's the other thing is that I'm surprised we didn't mention it really right off the bat. Is like, is being scary necessary to be a horror movie? And I would argue
I would
strong
say
no.
Yeah.
Especially because one, scariness is subjective.
Yeah.
But like like Friday the 13th doesn't scare me. There's nothing scary about that. I'm in it to watch the kills.
Yeah, but it's still edited and everything and shot and scored in a way where it's meant to be scary, whether or not that is like actually scary or just kind of stupid scary.
Yeah.
Or like Killer Clowns is funny first. Like, is Killer Clowns, I mean, I guess there's parts of it that are scary, but is it like scary first?
No.
Because even the scares in that are kind of jokes.
That Mooney scene in the puppet Mooney is a scary
but that's even
fucking
a gag.
Scene. It is a gag. You're right.
Yeah.
You're right.
So I don't know. I really think that there's not ever going to be a way. No one's ever going to. I really is just gut feeling. Do you think it's a horror? Yes. And honestly, I am also like, I love horror. It's the best. But I love movies in general, and I'm okay with classifying something with horror if I really liked it and can talk about it on the podcast. That's my classification for what a horror movie is can I reasonably discuss this on the podcast and not have everyone be like, I'm unsubscribing, this is pointless. All right, next movie. Upgrade.
Okay. This is, I think, another one that's like The Guest, perfectly in limbo.
It's a weird one, yeah.
Between horror and not.
Else, Upgrade. There were also some debates happening in the comments about Invisible Man, which that's a horror movie, guys.
Come on.
It's a horror. It's a horror
movie.
movie. I think sometimes people get thrown off if there is any presence of technology in something, because I think people immediately associate that with sci-fi or action, or if there are action scenes in something, therefore it's an action movie. But I don't think that's necessarily
And sci-fi
true.
horror has a long history going back at least to Alien.
Alien. There were also debates about Alien, which I do also think is firmly a horror movie.
I would probably say Alien is first a horror and then sci-fi.
I agree.
They have the closest relationship of any two genres, probably.
I mean, Frankenstein.
What?
Frankenstein.
Yeah.
It is like horror and like I think that you're right. They do have like the closest relationship of any two genres, literally, because I think,
like fantasies somewhere in there too,
but I think because you can, if you try and pinpoint the origin of horror, you're also going to find the origin of sci-fi with Frankenstein.
It's why the two have always been at conventions together.
Yeah.
You know, I think the emergence of like horror specific conventions is a relatively recent one. I think before that there were probably more
just
conventions
sci-fi
that
horror.
genre conventions. If you
Yeah,
will.
sure. And that's
Yeah.
also just the idea of like, well, conventions are more popular and they're so popular that we can now just get more and more specific and people will go to them.
Yeah.
Because fan culture is different now.
Exactly,
too.
because like Motor City Comic Con when I went in 2005 or whatever, it's not a horror. It's like
It's just stuff.
horror, comics, sci-fi. It's like, oh, all this stuff that the weird people are into, put it all in one place.
Right.
So yeah.
All right, Upgrade.
Upgrade. We both feel it's horror, right?
I think it's a horror movie.
People have called it body horror, which
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that's.
It's not body horror in the
like a
way that I
Cronenberg
usually.
sense,
Yeah, body
yeah.
horror is like society,
Yeah.
or where it's like you're gonna look at this thing and be disgusted by it, and it's like the human body, and well, maybe not even necessarily. Like I would say, Alien gets into like weird body horror stuff because it looks so phallic, and
Oh.
that's another podcast episode. But yeah, this is more just the horror of things being done to your, or like not having control over your
Exactly.
body, which
Yeah.
in itself is another subgenre of horror, like Invasion of the Body Snatchers and
Ooh,
stuff.
yeah.
Yeah, so I don't know if I would. I get not thinking it's a horror though.
Yeah, because it's sci-fi for sure.
Yes.
A lot of tech and,
The questions
exploration
of
of that.
tech, yeah.
It's a crime movie. It's him hunting down, like, with mystery elements of, like, why did this happen to my wife, and, like, hunting down the culprits of it. But I think this is one that, like The Guest, the person who made it influences how I think of it.
Yeah.
It's Lee Winnell. It just feels horror to me.
Another filmmaker where that happens, I think the most often, is John Carpenter.
Oh,
I think a lot of
yeah.
John Carpenter movies, people don't even second guess as not being like,
It's like
they
live.
live as like horror fans like it and regard it as horror, and you see it at horror conventions. It's like, but is it even a horror movie? I don't
They
know
Live
if it is.
might not be, even though I would instinctively say yes, like you said. I think that's
it's
a great point.
horrifying.
Mm-hmm.
That could almost be more sci-fi also.
Yeah, for sure.
Because that's like the aliens. It's aliens using tech to brainwash our planet and stuff. It's super sci-fi.
Yeah, it's like a Twilight Zone episode, which is again horror and sci-fi. Yeah.
So I don't know, but I think John Carpenter is like the best example of a director who, because they are known for making horror, like John Carpenter makes Halloween, and I think thereafter you just associate.
It's like it has to be really, really, really not horror for you to not count it as horror. Like Starman.
Like Starman,
I have not
right.
seen it, but I'm assuming you would not instinctively call that
Starman
horror.
is not. Starman is just romantic.
Similar to Carpenter's Wes Craven, he has also made a romantic movie. I forget the title of it, but one that is for sure not horror. But then when you get to something like People Under the Stairs, is that horror? I think it's close enough to count it because of who made it.
I think it's a horror.
Yeah.
But that also, I think People Under the Stairs gets into like, because that one is such like commentary and
As is They Live.
as is something like Us. A lot of people were disappointed because they didn't feel like it measured up to being a horror movie, which I disagree with.
Both
It's
of Peele's films were
they're
like,
horror
are they horror? Yeah.
Yeah, they
man,
are. Just
they are.
it's interesting. So I say upgrade, yes, but I get why you would think it's not.
And the poll results?
Oh, so horror 51.1% and not horror 48.9%. We had
Perfect.
4,695 votes.
I honestly wouldn't have it any other way than
Yeah.
a pretty solid 50-50.
All right, we have our next one is Silence of the Lambs. Because they're actually, the reason I included this one is there was a Twitter, not like drama, but there was just a Twitter
discussion
post that blew up a little bit about
Pretty recently, yeah.
Silence of the Lambs, and they thought it's not a horror. I'm watching it, and it's not like not
Again,
horror.
it's I think that this is one of those movies where one might be inclined to say that it's not simply because of how prestigious it feels.
Right.
Just because, as we discussed a little bit earlier, it can sometimes feel as though a movie loses its horror cred if it gets Oscar nominations.
Yeah, like the
you know?
blockbuster phenomenon. Yeah, we mentioned earlier. It's like,
Yeah.
well, does it even feel like a horror movie anymore?
Even though Exorcist was nominated for
That's
Oscar.
what I was about to
and
say. It's like, but The Exorcist, though.
is for sure. But Silence of the Lambs is one that I would consider horror, but not primarily horror. It is, I always stand clear of the thriller name because I feel like it's applied to some horror movies just as a way to, it's almost like the elevated horror bullshit where
I
it's,
don't know about. I don't think thriller has like extra prestige.
I think it does sometimes. I think there are certain people who look down on horror, and when there's a movie that they like that's a horror movie like Silence of the Lambs, they're more apt to call it a thriller than being willing to call it a horror. Although with Silence of the Lambs, I would say thriller feels apt. Because I'm trying to think, what's the boiling bunny rabbit movie?
Oh, not Cruel Intentions. Fatal Attraction.
Yes, Fatal Attraction, I feel, is like a great example of a thriller movie. And I would never consider that a horror movie. So thriller, there are thriller movies. Thriller is indeed a genre that exists. But I feel that sometimes people misapply it to horror movies just to kind of separate them from the slashers. Because some people just think horror movies either have to be
Like a monster.
a haunted house movie or a slasher.
Right.
Where that's not true, obviously.
It's so weird though because we talked about Unhinged on this podcast,
Yeah.
and that one I'm even like, is it a horror? It's very thriller, but I wouldn't apply thriller to that because I think it's good. I mean, it is good, but not good in the way that I'm like, no, this is prestigious.
Yeah.
Which is not what I wanted from that.
Silence of the Lambs, you think?
Silence of the Lambs, yeah, I think it's a horror movie.
What makes you think it?
I think it feels like a horror to me. Feels like one, so it is.
Hannibal Lecter is a great horror villain.
Yeah, and
he eats people. That's pretty
Buffalo
scary.
Bill and
Yeah.
like, I don't know. It just the vibes are just such horror to me.
I think it is a crime film, right?
Yeah, I think like
almost.
crime drama or
Yeah, drama for sure, thriller, but I think horror is among its many genres. And then I believe that the sequel Hannibal leans more into horror. I haven't seen it since it came out.
Yeah, the fact that Hannibal is a cannibal probably does a lot for it being a horror movie.
And then the show really leaned into horror, I think.
Yeah, and I wonder if there's something to the idea that like horror movies, because I think if Silence of the Lambs didn't have as much very specific imagery, like you got the Death's Head moth and you've got Precious and you've got like, Buffalo Bill doing the goodbye horses, and like there's so much memorable imagery in it that often something that's just a crime movie and I would never consider a horror movie doesn't have. And I wonder if that's anything.
Well, here's one that I really regret not asking you to put up a poll for, and it now seems like a good enough time. 7.
Ooh.
Yeah.
That's okay. See, that kind of really like takes a giant dump all over that argument I was just making because seven in my gut I don't think is a
I agree.
horror,
In my gut, I
but
say
it
no.
also that's a movie where you've got the head in the box and you've got there's so much imagery in that
Horrific imagery. The guy who like forced to
he
eat
eats
himself to death.
Yeah, he eats beans
The
to death.
lust kill. That awful.
Yeah, like
yeah.
the air fresheners everywhere with the sloth kill. Like, yeah, that's
And in a less pulpy but still similar crime thing, Zodiac. Some people say, yeah, it's really tough. When it gets to true crime, I'm
That's a
much more
tough
reluctant
one.
to call it horror.
Same.
Because that feels more, I don't know, that feels more investigative almost.
With that, yeah. Zodiac has terrifying moments. Like the scene by the lake
God,
is one of the
this-
scariest
yeah.
scenes in any movie
Jesus.
ever. But yeah, I don't consider Zodiac.
I would say
especially
Zodiac-
because it's like such a serious consideration of a thing that really happened. That's like tough for me to then say, yeah, this is a horror movie, because then I think another thing with horror is at a certain point, horror is a fun genre and is escapist, and Zodiac is like, no, this is real stuff. Like the characters are real people that died, and that's not like a fun fantasy escape to I'm just thinking even horror movies where they're based-ish on real things, like again Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer is based loosely, but they aren't the real people. It's like based on that but not quite, and Texas Chainsaw, but that's so far removed from
I think what I'm discovering during this conversation is that for me, if a movie focuses a lot on the legal system or the justice system or like the whole crime element of something,
like solving
it is a
crime.
higher bar for me to consider it horror. Because Seven, like we said, lots of horrific imagery. I still say gut instinct no. Zodiac, I say no. Silence of the Lambs, I will say yes, maybe just because I grew up considering it horror.
Yeah.
And then there's a movie like Saw, which is, focused on that kind of like discovering the killer, but come on,
But
it's a horror
not,
movie.
like that's
it's got the traps and
we're
everything.
that one's not like high legal drama.
Yeah.
It's-
So when it really gets into like the police procedural element, my guard is up a little bit on calling it horror, I think.
That's interesting too.
Because like Seven,
I'm trying to think,
plenty of
are there
people would
any
call
like
it.
scary police procedurals? I don't know if that's a thing.
We'll get comments with some
I'm
good
sure,
ones.
I'm sure, yeah. That's interesting.
So what did the poll results say for Silence of the Lambs?
90.6% say horror and
Wow.
9.4% say not.
9 out of 10.
Yeah, but there's some good arguments for it being not. This is from at Mass Darkness, says it's suspenseful, but overall it doesn't have the structure of or the amount of tension and overall dark vibe that's something like Seven, which I do think is a horror film. So we're the opposite here. It has,
Great.
to me, it works better as a prestige thriller. This is an interesting argument. At Wizzy WISI Mario says, if a movie with horror elements can be considered horror, where's the case for Taxi Driver as a horror film? That is an interesting point. Because Taxi
we can talk
Driver.
about that in a bit. Another option.
At Weird Werewolf says, I'm probably in the minority, but I think it's a thriller film, partly because I grew up in Russia where it's always been categorized as such. That's an interesting thing that I didn't even think about.
Cultural
and
differences?
partly because it puts more emphasis on the crime solving part of the plot. So
yeah,
just like culturally, like if you, I'm sure like different countries have different ideas of what constitutes a horror movie, and
based on like what that culture finds
right,
scary.
like what do we prioritize as scary? And I'd be interested to know if you're not from the United States specifically, because that's where we're from. If you're from not here, are there any of these movies where you're kind of shocked by where they fall because of maybe a cultural thing, or they're categorized as one way or the other? And
I'm willing to say that perhaps I would not classify Silence of the Lambs as horror if it wasn't Silence of the Lambs, Yeah, I can't think
What?
of a time in my life where I wasn't familiar with Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
And getting into the genre as young as I did, I included it among horror movies. It was on my little HTML coded horror movie website, along with Jurassic Park. So that's a personal history of just, but I think everyone, because they know Silence of the Lambs and because Hannibal always appears with other horror movie
Yes, he
characters,
does, yeah.
I think that just like primes you to accept it as horror.
That's again, that I think is like the argument I was trying to make is like the imagery though. Like Hannibal Lecter is a horror movie villain. Like he just is.
I wonder if I haven't seen it in so long, so I can't say anything about it. I wonder Manhunter,
Oh yeah, it's
where
been
isn't it Brian Cox
Yeah, it is.
as Hannibal instead of Anthony Hopkins? I wonder how we would feel about that one.
I have no idea.
Yeah, because that one I
No
believe
idea.
is more of a straightforward like crime procedural one, but still got Hannibal. Who knows?
Yeah. All right, next up we have you requested this be put on here. The Purge?
Yeah,
I'm interested
You
why
know-
because it was kind of a blowout.
I kind of messed up by just saying The Purge, because that first movie is a home invasion movie, which I believe is a subgenre of horror.
Yeah.
And I think it's pretty strongly horror. Those sequels, though, I think an argument can be made about the sequels where it's more actiony. There's less of it's more of an exploration of like political ideas and stuff.
Yeah, it gets into that weird like they live
Yeah.
area where it's like it has a political bent and there's action and but yeah, I don't know.
Because like the premise is for sure scary. You know, there is a 12-hour window where anything can be done legally. But I think with some of the sequels, it could be argued that maybe they are. I think they all are.
Yeah, I do too.
And it sounds like the poll.
The poll, yeah, and this I just had The Purge, so just that first one. Not the first Purge, but The Purge, the first movie. Horror 86.4%, not horror 13.6%. We had 6,176 votes on that one too.
Okay.
Yeah.
So.
The one after that is I put Terminator.
Okay.
This was more of it's still there's a clear winner, but it wasn't as much of a.
What are the results saying? We can discuss
We have
it.
4,518 votes, horror 31.5%, and not horror 68.5%.
Interesting.
That
so
is
this
an
is
interesting
about
one.
1/3 not horror, 2/3 1/3 horror, 2/3 not horror.
Yeah.
I would call it horror. The first one?
Kind of do too. The first one, yeah. And actually, friend of the show, Chauncey K. Robinson, says Terminator has a crazy robot walking around killing everybody. That's horrifying to me. Like the opening of Terminator, I think I've talked about this on the pod before,
Yeah.
but I saw, like, I think my parents rented Terminator because they thought I was old enough and could handle it. And that opening scene where he's just walking around naked and I'm so confused and this guy is very scary and naked and what the fuck. It was just too much. It's terrifying.
It's a dark movie in the way
Yeah.
that it's shot, in the tone. I mean, there's some humor, although I think that's more prominent in like T2, which T2 I would put way lower on horror.
Yeah, T2 is
Doesn't feel horror.
an action movie.
Action, sci-fi, almost adventure between him and the kid.
Yeah.
But yeah, that first Terminator just feels so dark and almost slashery. He's almost
Yes,
a slasher
a lot of
villain.
people in defense of it being a horror say, no, it's a straight up slasher. At Michael Antonio Z says Terminator is a slasher and a monster movie. The world needs to know this. At Caspi Fox says if this ain't horror, then neither is Chucky. Majority of people seem to think it's an action or sci-fi. That's an interesting.
I don't know about that Chucky comparison.
Sure. I mean,
But-
yeah, like Creepy Doll that's
Creepy doll and like more of a focus on kills and
Yeah,
like creative
sure.
kills.
But yeah, I think the thing that sticks with me from Terminator versus something like T2 is just the mood of Terminator and less like any action in it. And yeah, I don't know. It feels like a horror to me. I don't know why I just was like, oh, Terminator. I'll also put Robocop because I haven't seen Robocop in a while, and I think Robocop is a horrifying movie, but I wasn't sure where I fell here. Robocop, 4,182 votes. How do you feel about Robocop? I'm curious.
It's been too long.
That's also
since
I
I've
haven't seen it
for me to classify it.
And the scenes,
I've never thought of it as horror. I've never classified it as horror.
Yeah.
If I'm going by what did young me put on that website in like 2001, I never put Terminator on it, even though I put like Alien and Jurassic Park on it. But I've always been open to the idea of Terminator, the first one, being a horror movie. I've never considered RoboCop a horror movie.
I don't know why. Because I put Terminator and then I was like, RoboCop is a scary, to me is a scary movie, and the parts of it that like I'm more familiar with, because I've seen it, but it's been a long time, but I remember fucking loving it. I hadn't seen it until I was in college, and I saw it at a midnight screening.
Oh, that was
fun
great.
as fuck. There's some guy dressed in like a shitty RoboCop costume with a siren and everything. It was a lot of fun, but
and it's also ultra violent.
It's extremely violent. It's dark. It's dark satire. It's a Verhoeven movie, so the satire is like it's like a Carpenter, where it's like the satire and the social commentary. See, like that's I think maybe that's where I am, is like, if I think They Live is a horror, why wouldn't I think this is a horror?
Yeah.
Especially because it's so fucking violent, and the scene where like they have the demo robot come into the conference room. That's like right at the beginning, I think, and it just like fucking annihilates that guy, and it's fun. It's like darkly funny, but it's still terrifying.
Yeah, I'd be interested in rewatching it.
I would love to rewatch it. I mean, I'll rewatch RoboCop any day because I loved it when I saw it, and it's been a minute. So,
but what our polls say about it?
Horror 6.3%.
Wow.
Not horror 93.7%.
See, for me, I can't say too much because I don't remember it, but it feels as though RoboCop and Terminator should have the same response. Maybe that's not right.
It's hard to say.
But then again, I said that about Jurassic Park and Jaws, and then was immediately given an argument where I was like, well, no, maybe not. So
I mean, that's how I feel about like RoboCop and They Live. I'm like, they're
I think
either
that's a good
one
comparison.
or the other.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
someone, let's see. Derek, a friend of the show, at DMan1954, Gojira, says RoboCop's a horror movie told from the perspective of the slasher. Changed my mind, which I think is interesting. But yeah, and it's like, it also has such a scary villain too. Fucking I hate that.
Red
just
Foreman?
like Red Foreman. He has a fucking name and it's in other stuff. Yeah, I don't know. I that's an excuse to just rewatch RoboCop.
yeah, which we'll do.
Jaws, 4,801 votes. It's funny because some of these movies don't even have like debate under them.
It's funny that Jurassic Park had like 7,000. How'd that get? I feel like some people
felt
retweeted and like
passionately about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Jaws, there wasn't even like there were no responses to that tweet at the
Really?
time there was like no debate even. Horror 84.3%, not horror 15.7. I think also because a lot of the debate over Jaws was happening in the Jurassic Park one. But
yeah, that's fair.
I think Jaws is a horror movie.
Yeah, because like we said earlier, the intent is to be scary and suspenseful, even though it's got that Steven Spielberg whimsy to it.
God, the ending of it, where it's just the happy music and they're paddling back to shore.
Or them being drunk together, whether it's
yeah.
on the boat or at Brody's house. There are a lot of moments that aren't horror at all, that feel like adventure or even family movie at some points. But I do think the overall intention is to be scary, and for me, creature feature equals subgenre of horror.
I think if your movie is like there's a creature in it.
I mean, that's what we spent the summer talking about.
Right, yeah. Our next one, Joker. And I think you requested this go on here because people request it nonstop.
On the kill count, yeah.
4,565 votes. Do you want me to just read the...
Yeah, hit me up with it because it's going to be sweet serotonin.
10.1%. Not horror, 89.9%.
You know what? I'm disappointed.
It should have been more of a
It should have been more.
It's not a horror movie.
And this is where we can discuss Taxi Driver.
Sure, okay, yeah, because Taxi Driver... And again, this is all like subjective because Taxi Driver, you could also make the argument, and maybe to the same extent Joker, that like, well... if you're gonna talk about character study movies, like I think Joker is and Taxi Driver is, it's like such an homage to stuff like Taxi Driver. Like, why then is Henry Portrait of a Serial Killer a horror movie and then these two aren't? But
I think Henry is intended to
Henry's
scare
also
you
fucking
and
terrifying.
unsettle you.
Yeah, it's like a fucking nightmare to watch.
I don't think. I wonder if there's a difference between being made to feel uncomfortable and being scared, and if people sometimes mistake them for each other. Because I do think Joker does intend to make you feel uncomfortable, does intend to make you feel almost questioning of where your alliances lie on this moral perspective of the character. Things like that. It makes you question like societal, I don't know, stuff.
Yeah, but then so does Henry. Like, Henry is...
But I think Henry also intends to scare you.
Yeah.
And I don't think Joker intends to scare you.
No, but, and again, I've only seen Henry once and it was in college, but Henry, I remember also feeling way more like uncomfortable than I ever was scared.
Yeah.
So that's tough. Like, that's tough. Like, it's hard to, again, that might just be a gut feeling one where I'm like, no, Henry's like a horror movie.
But I feel so strongly that Joker is not.
Oh, yeah, I don't think Joker is at all.
Because I don't think it ever really intends to make you afraid.
No, it's like the only things I would say would qualify it for horror, like how violent it is and like it's not morality, but yeah, like just the weird like headspace it puts you in. But if that's your qualifier, then like, is Goodfellas a horror movie?
Exactly.
No,
it's
absolutely
more of like a crime
not.
movie, and I wouldn't even call it a crime movie, but
although listen, if I could stretch Goodfellas being a horror movie, I would talk about that movie
we
nonstop.
can't do that because then every episode will be a Scorsese movie.
We would just be a Scorsese podcast. We can't open those floodgates, dude.
Like that one scene in his apartment is like the closest it comes to being scary for me. When he kills the one guy and then lets the other guy go.
Yeah,
But
and like the stuff with the girl that we realize he's stalking.
Oh yeah,
And that's a scary reveal that no, they've never really talked. He's just a creep, and yeah, like that's scary. But
and I forget, is John Wick one of these polls
No.
or no? Just because that also is a frequently requested one.
as a violent action movie.
It's a violent action movie of which there are many. It's like Old Boy. I don't think is horror.
Old Boy is a more of a gray area to me because I do think Old Boy has like, I think it's so deeply disturbing that it kind of starts heading to horror town. Like,
Okay.
less than, because John Wick is never meant to make you feel anywhere near the way that Old Boy like Old Boy is.
It's disturbing.
It's a it's a nightmare. Like, that movie is a nightmare, and John Wick is not. It's like, it's a revenge flick, but it's not meant to make you feel fucked up like Old Boy does after you watch it.
You know what would be worth watching that would fall in this continuum of action and horror and where one falls is The Raid, I believe. Because I've never seen it, but I see it bump shoulders or rub shoulders with the movies that we know as horror.
Right.
So I'm curious to see how that would be and what we would think of that one.
Yeah. Coraline.
I would say yes.
I say yes.
Children's horror movie, which is a perfectly acceptable blend of genres.
Literally, yeah, somewhat at CB Jams says baby's first horror movie, definitely one of the early ones that got me enjoying being scared.
I haven't seen Hotel Transylvania, but I wonder if that is also a children's horror movie. Or if that's just a comedy with a
I think
horror
that's
aesthetic.
That's like, it's a kid's with
But Coraline is scary.
Characters in it. Coraline is actually scary. And
Other Mom is scary.
You're right. Yeah, that whole,
all buttons for eyes and shit.
The whole concept of it is terrifying.
Yeah, so just because it's a kid's movie doesn't mean it's not horror.
Right. So 4,522 votes. Horror 76.7%. Not horror 23.3%.
3/4 horror. I like it.
Next, we have Sleepy Hollow, the Tim Burton, 3,690 votes.
We just
lean
watched
towards it being a horror.
I would definitely say
it's the same with like Crimson Peak,
it's
where
gothic,
I'm like, it's gothic horror, and it would be silly to say it's not a horror because it doesn't necessarily fit into like my more modern idea of what a horror
Yeah,
movie is.
and I think it is gothic horror, which makes it horror, and then add on top of that, that is a bloody movie.
It is. It's extremely
Lots
violent.
of heads getting lopped off. It's great.
So horror 84.8%, not horror 15.2.
Good.
And the very last movie I had on the poll was Promising Young Woman, which 2,411 votes. Not as many people have seen it, understandably.
Just came out. We just watched it.
We just watched it. I said I was going to do it for the podcast. I don't know if I want to anymore after we talked more about it, because it's a lot. I did not like it at all.
I liked it, but didn't love it.
Didn't feel like just being down on a movie for over an hour when my reasons for not liking it are really personal. And I was like, nah, it just kind of sucked.
Yeah.
Promising Young Woman, horror 28.2%, not horror 71.8%.
Okay. I guess I can understand the reason. I'm glad this is last so we can talk about it. It's the newest movie that I feel people are the least likely to have seen. So spoilers for that right now.
Yeah.
I think it was marketed as a horror movie.
It was.
And then was nowhere near a horror movie.
That trailer was going around horror Twitter like crazy.
Yeah.
Where it was like the string cover of Toxic.
Yep.
And it was like the implication of the trailer is like, oh, it's this crazy revenge flick.
And that opening scene is a great opening scene for a horror movie.
It opens with a horror mini movie. And I think that's what pisses me off more is that it's just not that. It's like they had an idea and like they wrote that scene and then just did a different.
I think that's what happened. They pitched the original opening scene and then got like but I do think that, again, I'll say that I liked it more than you, but I didn't love it like I know a lot of people did. But I am severely disappointed at the reveal that apparently she acts drunk, goes home with these guys, and then says, bad. And
hey,
leaves.
you did it. Yeah, she does a spaghetti. She jumps out from behind. She goes, spaghetti.
What
I wasn't drunk.
the fuck is the point?
It fucking sucks.
What the
ass.
fuck
I
is
hate
the
that
point of
shit.
that, man?
I
thought she was killing these guys.
Yeah, I feel like I think that's where my dislike comes in is I feel personally a bit ripped off and a bit like, I don't know. I think I'm taking it more personally than it's, but just the fact that I feel led on is what it's just like.
Yeah.
I'm being told even in the beginning of this movie that like, oh fuck yeah, she's about to go kill these fucking dudes.
And the way the first scene ends leaves it you think that she killed him.
And I'm like, hell yeah, let's do it, because that's like a escapist, like crazy, let's do it. And that's not what it is, and I felt really upset.
Because then she fucking goes she's with McLovin and she like is like and leaves him, and I was like, oh, she let that one live. Okay. Right. But then with Richardson Detroiters.
Yeah, Sam Richardson.
With Detroiters guy, when she's about to do it to him, he's like, oh, you're that chick that Jerry went home with, implying that Adam Brody is still alive, so she doesn't fucking kill anyone.
Bullshit.
And so the one person who dies in that movie is, again, spoilers, is her. It's fucked up.
I have so many issues with this movie.
It's fucked up.
I don't, like, I can't even, like, because we could talk about it for a while.
Yeah.
I'll just say, because I don't think we're gonna do an episode on it because I'm just gonna be pissed off the whole time. But
it could have been, it makes me wonder if we should, because I know that rape revenge is a subgenre of horror, and it's one that we typically don't really engage with.
That sucks to talk about.
But this one had the opportunity to be a perhaps better rape revenge than normal. Oh, we did just watch Hunted, which was in that vein.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
One, and that was better.
That was a very well done rape revenge.
I wonder if revenge. I always hear.
Yes,
about.
I have not seen that, but I've had it recommended a lot.
So I'd be willing to watch. Yeah. Any old rape revenge movies I don't want to watch.
Yeah, like no, I'm good. I know what this is gonna be.
But like new ones, if like with Hunted, where it's like, oh, it's told with some perspective, I'd be more open to it. But,
yeah. Anyway, Promising Young Woman is not a fucking horror movie.
Not a fucking horror movie.
All right. So, oh man, I just think I had more tweets from people. We just don't have enough time.
It's too long. But you did have one more poll question. Is Wario a libertarian?
Oh yeah, is Wario a libertarian?
Which obviously
and
he is.
I forgot to copy paste those results because I'm a bad person. Let me see. I mean, it was like a blowout. He's definitely a libertarian.
Wow.
I mean, he just is. I think, yeah. Yeah, he's definitely all about that free market. Dude. He loves it. He loves the invisible hand of the free market. Like, you know what? Wario says if you didn't work hard enough, that's your fault. Oh, man.
All right. I did not expect for this to go on for so long, but it was such a fun conversation.
Yeah.
I love it.
That's a good one. Go forth and debate in the comment section. Be nice. And don't be assholes to each other.
Yeah.
But
and realize that...
don't be assholes to us.
Well, primarily, yeah. And realize that there's no concrete right or wrong answer.
No yes or no. Yeah, there's no
not.
right. Yeah.
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 So just, make an argument, keep your mind open to other arguments, and that's basically it.
I think basically the best point, I think the best tweet that like summarized how I feel about this whole thing is let's see, from at 5 a.m. Beans. Can we just agree that all of them are horror and live in a blissful horror-filled life? Like, yeah, man. I think that's the best way to go about this. Is it a horror? Yeah, it just all is, man. It's all horror and it's all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the only reason that I get worked up about my own opinions on what is horror and what is not is because there are movies that I don't want to cover on the kill count, and people try to say,
I think that's where a lot of this anger comes from.
Yeah, well, you covered Jurassic Park. Yeah, but I'm not doing John Wick.
It's my channel. You don't like it, don't watch it, baby.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had a great time doing this.
Yeah, this is fun. So I don't know what we're doing next week because I thought we were doing Promising Element, but I don't fucking want to.
We'll do something else.
We'll do something, yeah.
I am going to do, I believe, a live stream of the last episode of Doom this Sunday on January 31st. Mm-hmm. So tune in for that, probably at noon on the channel. Gonna try to squeeze it in before the Royal Rumble. That's gonna be a fun day for James.
Oh boy.
Doom and the Rumble.
That's James Day.
That's a James Day. In the meantime, you can follow Dead Meat on social media at Dead Meat James on Twitter and Instagram.
And I'm at Carebec, Carebecc on Twitter and Instagram. And if you want merch, deadmeatstore.com, which doesn't exist anymore. I'm so used to saying that. The deadmeatstore.com right now is not a thing.
Yeah. Whew. Email deadmeatpod@gmail.com with any notes, but maybe don't have the horror or not horror discussion there. Just keep it in the comments.
Don't. Yeah, please just
don't fill that
please,
inbox.
Please don't. Please don't.
And until next time, I'm James.
I'm Chelsea.
And this has been the Dead Meat Podcast.